Hello, my name is Katherine Inge, and I work at Virginia Commonwealth University's Rehabilitation Research and Training Center. And today I'd like to talk with you a little bit about discovery, specifically informational interviewing and observations. Now, you might be wondering how we could spend an entire webcast on that topic because interviewing and observation seem quite simple. However, there are some strategies that I would like to share with you today to think about for the next time that you do an interview or an observation with one of your job seekers. So let's get started and see if we can find one or two interesting things that you didn't know already about interviewing and conducting observations. First, really, what all of this relates to that we're going to be talking about today is discovery. And we talk about doing interviews, observations, participating with the person in familiar and unfamiliar settings, work experiences, and reviewing documents and materials when we do discovery. And often I think what happens is that we talk about these things from a rather broad perspective and we don't drill down a little more to really talk about what we are looking for when we do these activities. And hence, that's why I thought it would be a good idea to look at this a little more in depth during this presentation. The only thing that I'd like to say a little bit more about on this particular slide is the last bullet point on this slide, which says examining documents and materials. Now, often that's the very first thing that some people do when they get a new individual that wants to come to their agency to find a job. And I would suggest that maybe it's the last thing you want to do because you don't want to come up with any preconceived ideas or attitudes about the person because often what ends up in these documents and materials are things about the person's challenges as opposed to some of their positive characteristics. So discovery means that we really want to find out the positive things about the individual, and that's primarily what we're going to be focusing on as we move through some of this information. Excuse me. So let's think about interviewing. And I think the very first important thing, and maybe seems kind of common sense, is that we need to be interested in the other person, and that is really critical to the basic assumption underlying interviewing. So our quote is from a qualitative research book, by the way, for those of you who are interested in research, and it says being interested in others is key to the basic assumptions underlying interviewing. And the important thing about that is that we need to put aside any preconceived ideas or notions that we might have about the individual while we are interviewing them and also while we're observing them, as a matter of fact. So, in order to illustrate this point, I'd like to really tell you sort of a story on myself. And maybe you can also think while I'm telling you this story in a situation where you might have had a preconceived idea or assumption about someone with a disability. We had a young man come to our project to receive customized employment services. And I remember talking to his employment specialist, and I said, could you tell me a little bit about this person? And one of the first things that she told me about him was that he played the piano. Now, I kind of smiled to myself and I thought, well, that's really nice. And my previous assumption really had to do with myself because I had tried to learn to play the piano in my youth and I pretty much probably couldn't play a thing now. And I'm sure I had 5 years of lessons. So I'm thinking, well, isn't that nice? He plays the piano, and I kind of filed it away. Well, then we recorded him playing the piano, and I heard it. And the recording was for a video resume that we were doing. And I had wanted to play that during our presentation today, but where you will find this link that's showing on our slide here, you'll find it with the webcast, so you can actually see his video resume as well as listen to him play. And I was literally, I guess, blown away is the only way to say this, as far as how outstanding this young man was at playing the piano. And he indeed had 13 years of piano lessons, excuse me, and played classical music. So it taught me something about my own assumptions that I make about people with disabilities, in the sense that I didn't expect anything and was really surprised when I learned something about myself, that I should not assume that people with disabilities do not have gifts and talents. And that's what discovery is all about, underlying gifts and talents that we are uncovering with our interviews and observations. So that's really important to think about. And I hope, as I was talking about this example, that you perhaps thought of someone that you expected less of than what the person was able to do. So typically when we do interviews, we do them in our agencies. And we start off with the age-old question of, what do you want to do for a job? Where do you want to work? And would you like to find a job? These are typical questions that we ask. And I'd like to suggest to you that these typical questions may not be a place to start. And why would that be the case? Well, usually someone who comes to you for customized employment services are either not going to have had experiences with work, or their experiences have not been great and they need more intensive support services. So it's really critical to think that if you ask that individual, what do you want to do for a job, they have very limited experiences from which to respond to you. And so what happens? Well, we go back to that assumption that I was just talking about, was that they don't know what they want to do for a job, that they have no idea, that they don't know where they want to work. And in some cases, maybe you end up saying, well, they're not motivated to work. So we're going to set all of those assumptions aside again, and I'm going to ask you to think about where we might want to start, instead of asking someone, what do you want to do for a job? So discovery tells us that what we want to do is that we want to have a conversation with the person. So when doing discovery, we want to interview the person and learn about that person's experiences. So in the context of discovery, interviewing is a way to learn about a person's experiences. And we want to find out what meaning those experiences have for the person, and how they might impact the person's employment, or you as the employment specialist who is assisting the individual in finding a job. So let's think of some types of interviews that you might do, and these probably are familiar to you. And I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this, but probably typically what we have done is that we have a list of interviews, and we start at the top and we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's basically a structured interview that we have predetermined questions. And a lot of times we might have so many questions on our list that we don't really have time for a conversation, and we don't really put the person at ease, and perhaps we really don't learn very much about the individual. So I'm not a big fan of sitting down with the person with your clipboard or with your notepad with question 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 listed there. So the opposite extreme of that really would be that we're going to have an informal conversation. And that can be great if you are Oprah Winfrey, for instance. But perhaps you want to go the route where we're going to call them semi-structured interviews. So we're going to work at having a conversation with the person, but we might have a few questions there on a notepad that would stimulate some thought if the conversation doesn't go anywhere. Again, perhaps um, not putting the notepad right in front of the person. And I had someone tell me once, in fact, it was Kerry Griffin. I thought this was a really interesting thing that he said is, that notepad, well, he didn't say this part, but I think the notepad is sort of like a barrier between you and the person. What he did say was that if you sit and write on that notepad and you don't look at the individual, number one, you might distract the person from information that they want to tell you because they think you're writing on your notepad and it must be really important because you're writing it down. And then they don't think about other things that they might want to tell you. So the best point is jot down some bullet points if you are worried about remembering, but don't sit there and write down word for word everything that the person is saying, because again, that could be a barrier between you and the individual. So really within the context of doing interviews with the individual, what you like to do is a place to start with the person, sort of an informal kind of conversation where you can begin. So let's look at a case study example here. And I'll introduce you to a young woman that we worked with at VCU RRTC. And I remember her employment specialist coming to me and she said, well, I've asked her what she wants to do for a job. Remember, that's the question we probably don't want to start with. And she can't tell me. She just kind of goes blank and she doesn't talk. And I said, well, okay. And I said, well, let's just go have a conversation with her. So off we went to this young woman's home. And I think that's the best place to do interviews because it's where the person is comfortable. It's not in your agency where you're the boss, so to speak, and they're the person that's a little bit nervous about what you're going to talk about. So I remember going to her house very distinctly, and the employment specialist asked her, well, what do you want to do? And it was very amusing in some ways to me because not amusing from the point of the individual, but very telling in the sense that the person just looked really sad. And she just said, I don't know. I don't think I can do anything. Literally, her affect was just blank. It really, truly was. So I said, well, let's talk about what you do on Saturday. What is the thing that you really like to do on a Saturday? And what's your favorite thing to do? And it was like a light switch going off. And she sort of lit up and she said, well, my father and I go coin collecting on the weekend. And I thought, okay, something we can talk about. So um, we started a conversation about coin collecting. And these are just some things to think about. Are these the best questions that you could ask? Well, not really. They're just listed as examples. And I'm sure that if you're sitting there listening to this right now, you could come up with a million ideas yourself. But since we were in her house, I said, I would love to see your coin collection. Now, um, why do I want to see the coin collection? Well, looking at that coin collection could tell me a lot about this person. Does she bring out a box with all the coins just stuffed in a box? Are they organized in any way? What does that tell me about her personality, her skills, her interests? Well, actually, when asked about how she organized her coins, we discovered that she had a list of all the coins that she had, when she got them, how much they cost, and she was very organized. So no, yeah, and we asked, well, who created this document, and she had. So that told us about her word processing skills. She was able to create a Word document, type, list the coins, say where she got them, and what they cost. So immediately we learned something about this individual by asking her about her coin collection. Now, we're not necessarily focusing on the coin collection per se. We are learning something about her skills and her interests as we are interviewing her. So we asked her how she found the coins, some of the other things that might stimulate conversation. If she didn't respond to that, what you want to do is rephrase questions. And if they say, well, I don't know, maybe you could ask, where'd you find the last coin? Show me the last one. Show me your favorite one. Tell me about when you found it and how you found it. These are all different ways that you could ask her about her coin collection. Can you show me how you find coins online, for instance, if she says to you, I found that coin on the internet? Again, you are digging a little deeper. You're being a detective in many ways, finding out about her skills as you are talking about something that she really enjoys doing. And that is what is so key and interesting about interviewing people about their interests, because you learn about their skills as you are interviewing them. So other questions might be, why do you collect coins? And who do you like to talk to about coin collecting? In this example, this young woman collected coins with her father. And one of the other things that we found out when we were doing this was that question about, where did you find the last coin? And we found out that one of the places that she went most often was a coin shop in town. So what did that tell us? Well, let's go with her to the coin shop and see what happens in places that people who like to collect coins do. So this interviewing can lead to natural places to go to observe the person, to learn more about. I know a little bit about coin collecting, but I don't know what goes on in businesses. I can kind of assume that they put them in those little containers, the little cards with to protect the coins, all kinds of things that might be interesting that people do that collect coins. And whether this piece of information could lead to a vocational theme for this person. That's what we're doing. We're trying to direct our interviewing to find whether what those vocational themes are for people. So if you looked at our examples there a few minutes ago, you'll see that I really didn't have very, if any, yes or no questions on that list. So what these are closed-ended versus open-ended question. And a closed-ended question is nothing more than a yes/no question. And that is typically the type of questions that we as employment specialists ask people. Do you have hobbies? Do you like to go to Dairy Queen? Well, yes, I do like to go to Dairy Queen, which is why that one happens to be on there. But do you like to play games on your iPad, and do you spend time with friends? And I remember an employment specialist saying to me, sort of not too long ago, well, they just like to play games on their iPad. And I'm thinking, well, gee, there's a whole lot of things I could learn about that person if I knew what kind of games they played, and whether they played the games independently, how complicated the game was. In fact, for one person that liked to play games on their iPad, we learned that he went to um, gaming events and actually won money at gaming events. Again, putting our assumptions aside, we learned something about that individual that we got beyond that, oh, they just play games on their iPad feeling. So alternative questions, we want to do open-ended questions that stimulate conversation. What do you do in your free time? Tell me tell me about going, I think that's supposed to say, tell me what you do when you go to Dairy Queen, so it's not really phrased very well. So tell me about going to Dairy Queen. Describe how you use your iPad to play games. Tell me about the games that you play on your iPad. Tell me about your friends. What do you do when you get together? Again, all kinds of questions. So if, for instance, in the question, tell me about your friends, you might discover someone that knows the person really well that you can interview to learn more about the person. So again, you're kind of being a detective. You're digging down into what the person does, what the person likes to do, and that might lead to something else. Um, oh, one thing that I thought about the iPad, we did an interview with a young man who had a significant physical disability, and he said that he had a Facebook account. Um, and again, you could have your assumptions about what that person could do on an iPad. Well, the person actually had a Facebook account, and he had done all kinds of activities with a state legislature, um, someone at the House in Virginia about rights for people with disabilities. Again, don't assume that just because the person has a disability, you can't find out all kinds of really amazing information about the individual. So that's why it's really important to ask a person about, their experiences, their everyday activities, and all of this information, as I kind of mentioned a few minutes ago, hopefully can be translated into vocational themes for the person. That's the point of discovery. We're not just doing discovery um, for discovery's sake. It's not a little um, package of activities over here. We want to do this activity that's going to lead directly into vocational themes, a summary about how we're going to assist the person in achieving a customized job. So that's really important to consider. Um, I put this up here because I really like dogs, so I did this for myself as much as for you. So one of the things that people often say is that they like to play with their dogs. So I think that it's really important again to look at that a little more in depth. And the picture on this particular slide is of a dog that actually was the puppy of one of my dogs. And this woman had sent me this picture, and I enjoyed seeing the picture, and it was rather surprising to me because you can see the dog is sitting in a probably a very expensive boat, um, and you just don't think about these kind of things. So if you see pictures, you might learn something about the activities that the person does that you otherwise wouldn't know about. So if someone says to you, "I like to play with my dog," it would be interesting just not to write down the person likes his dog, but drilling down a little bit more. Tell me about it. Can you show me a picture? Can I meet your dog if you're at the person's house? Tell me what do you like doing about playing with your dog? Have you ever played with other people's dogs? Tell me about that. Now, why do you want to know? Have you ever played with other people's dogs? Again, we're looking to see what about this can animals be a theme of this person, or is this just something the person likes to do in their spare time? Because there certainly is a difference between what a person likes to do in their spare time and what they might like to do for a job. So we need to remember to keep that in mind when we are establishing vocational themes for people. So again, what else do you like to do with your dog? Can you give me an example? Tell me about what other pets you have. What do you do with your pets every day? Tell me about other animals that you like, etc. You know. So again, you don't see very many yes/no questions there, if any. Um, but if you get stuck in asking a yes/no question and someone says yes, then don't forget. Okay, follow it up with another question. Um, if someone, if you say, can you show me a picture of your dog, and they say yes, um, then then ask questions. We saw this picture of the dog in the boat. Well, how often do you go boating? Does the dog go with you all the time? What do you do when you go? So those are all things that you kind of drill um, down to. So here's another example um, about dogs. My favorite topic, apparently. And this is one of my dogs, and this was when he was getting older. His name was Buddy. He doesn't look so much like he wants to go for a walk, so I thought it might give us a little comic relief here. Um, so, so what if somebody says I walk my dog? Well, instead of writing down, they walk their dog, what can that tell us about the person? Do they walk their dog on the sidewalk? Do they walk the dog on the public street, telling you something about their skills? Where do they go? Do they go by themselves? Do they have to have someone to go with them? All of those things are pieces of information that can translate into knowing something about the individual's individual skills. And so what you're really thinking about is, okay, so if this turns into a vocational theme for someone, um, where do people go where do people work that that like dogs? And then that leads to observations, that leads to learning more about whether you can customize a job for this person that really likes, in this instance, dogs. Again, another puppy for someone else that had bought a puppy from me once upon a time. Um, a word of caution here is that we sometimes typically jump to our old ideas and our old ways of doing job development. So if I found out that this person likes dogs, oh, well, they could go work at the pet store and clean out the pet cages. Well, cleaning is really not working with dogs so much. The dog comes out of the cage and you're cleaning. Is the person seeing cleaning, or is it working with dogs? So that's why it's so important to go do those observations after you interview, because I think we start thinking of those preconceived ideas of what a person with disabilities can do, instead of going observing places where people work that like dogs. There may be nothing there that the individual really wants to do. And so let's just not assume and jump to the typical ideas that we have when we think about people working that have disabilities. So when we're doing interviews, we want to think about words that stimulate conversation. We want why, when, how, tell me about, describe, explain. And I'm sure you're sitting there and you can think of a lot of words yourself that aren't on this slide, and I would challenge you to do so. And maybe you already do this and you think, well, this is really basic information, but sometimes we get one or two thoughts along the way. So we need to keep an open mind about things. If in case you're interested, the young man in this picture, the device that he has there was made by a rehabilitation engineer. It was actually a motorized floor sweeper that would be run by someone that was modified for this individual, and he works at Planet Fitness and cleans the gym areas with his motorized sweeper. That is his particular job. And there were ways that we got to that, and I'll move on. And there's a case study of this person online that you can actually read more in-depth details. But we were having a hard time thinking of things for him to do, and we had a conversation with him and his mother. And I remember asking the mother, could we come? We were actually at a fast food restaurant having a hamburger together. And I asked the mother if we could come over to the house and have a home visit. And she said, of course, but you can't come on Friday. Well, instead of just saying, okay, we can't come on Friday, I was nosy. Remember, we need to drill down and be a detective. I said, oh, sure, that's fine. What do you guys do on Friday? And she said, well, every Friday we go to the gym, and Michael loves going to the gym. So we learned something about Michael that led us to some ideas about a customized job for him. So just thinking about this, where should we do interviews? How long should they be? How many should we do? And who should we interview? Well, we're looking to talk with family members and friends about what the person does. Where do they spend their time? What do they do regularly? We want to gather varying opinions from different people. Where does the person go to participate in activities? And I think, excuse me, it's important to remember that we're looking for quality of information, not numbers. Because I think sometimes we can get stuck and just keep doing discovery. So a little word of to the wise, if that you find yourself and you've done, 3 or 4 interviews, and I hate to put a number on anything because I don't like giving people numbers, but if you do a number of interviews and you're not learning anything new, then probably you've done enough interviews. So some of it is subjective, and I can't say everybody should have 5 interviews and every interview should last this long. But typically an interview lasts no more than an hour because after that point, you may not remember things that you asked or the person gets tired. So that is a typical rule of thumb for how long an interview should last. So we've already talked about some best practices for interviewing. I think other things that probably this is common sense. You want to wait for the other person to answer. If the person doesn't answer, don't rush to fill up empty spaces. Because the person might be thinking about what they want to answer, and if you leap ahead and just fill in all those pauses, you might not, you might miss a lot of really good information. Don't interrupt, don't talk too much. Try to look interested, of course. And if you don't get any answers, ask the question another way. And I'm going to tell you something amusing right now. Someone told me once that if you were doing an interview, you should sort of pretend like you were a newscaster or an interviewer on television. So we'll pretend like we're Oprah Winfrey, for instance, and she's doing an interview. Well, think about what Oprah Winfrey does when she's interviewing, or whoever your favorite person is or personality is, and kind of think and watch an interview and see how those play out. I think you can learn a lot of really good, interesting things. Let's look real quickly at a case study example. This is of a young woman that was receiving customized employment services from us, and the employment specialist came back from their home interview, and I said, tell me about the interview. And she said, well, the mother brought out a box of art projects, and she kind of shrugged, and I started asking questions about the project, and I said, well, what was in the box? And she really couldn't give me much information. And I thought, boy, what a missed opportunity. You know, these are just some questions that could have been asked. Show me the last project that you made. Where did you make it? How did you make it? What's your favorite thing in this box? Tell me about it. Now, are we looking to see if this person is an artist? Not really, but remember, is this something that the person likes to do? Where do people work that are interested in art? Um, and that's what you're trying to go towards. And what it turned out was there are a lot of ceramic like things in the box after we dug down a little bit talking to the employment specialist. And yes, indeed, this young woman went to an art studio that made ceramics. And so that led to an observation where we learned more about the person's skills, and we also learned about what people do who like those particular things. That's where you're going. It's not just stopping at this information. Um, which leads us nicely into the importance of observation. And I think we learn things in observations that we don't do in interviewing alone. And, you know, let's be honest, we have people who can't tell us things in interviews. So if we can get a little bit of information so that we learn about where people like to participate, then we can go observe them. And this is particularly important with individuals who have limited communication skills. So interviewing leads to observations within discovery. And what we're not doing is we're not using observations to evaluate the person's skills and decide that they really don't have any skills for employment. So I caution you about that. So here's another case study example. I kind of like to illustrate these points with examples because I think it makes it a little more real. We had a young man that who had autism. That's really irrelevant, and that who was deaf. And the employment specialist said, I really don't know what to do. So I said, okay, let's go visit the person at home. So you might be wondering why there's a picture here on the slide of somebody raking leaves. Well, we got into a conversation with the mom, and I said, well, what does he enjoy doing on the weekends? And her response back to me was, well, he gets up on Saturday morning and he goes out and does yard work, and he loves to do yard work. I don't have to ask him. I don't have to tell him. Now, might we have found that out if we had interviewed the person somewhere else? Well, maybe. I tend to think that it was such an informal situation um, that we learned more about the person. He was animated. He actually had a little bit of sign language. We connected with someone in the community who was an interpreter who gave us some feedback about the person's ability related to sign language. So it led to other things that we explored that we might not have done had we not had a conversation with the person at home with his mom. And the other thing that was really interesting about this, and I need to move on, but the mom said, "Oh, wait a minute," and she went and brought out a number of pictures of him doing different things. And one of the pictures was of him in a uniform where he had done a work experience through school. Again, in that particular example, we had an opportunity that we not would not have had because the mother would not have had access to those pictures had we not been in home. So those are all the things that we learned about that particular person. Um, I think what I would caution you about at this point is not that you were doing this, but I would be negligent if I didn't say this. That the purpose of observations is not to teach the person skills so that they can become employed. So it's not to go out and have a whole lot of work experiences and extend discovery. Um, because I think what I see happening is that discovery is lasting a really long time. And it's not that we're really learning anything more about a person. I mean, we could do discovery for the next year, but the person's not going to get a job if we concentrate so much on discovery. Again, our goal um, is to identify vocational themes, move on, and work towards a customized job for the person. And one final word of caution is that continuing to observe the person in the same place or the same setting is not necessarily helpful. And I don't want to say you're wasting your time, but you really want to limit the number of segregated settings where you observe the person, because that's going to be totally different than what the person does in the real world, so to speak. Um, and you know, I could come up with a million examples, but I don't have all day to talk to you today. So we're going to move on, and I'd like for you to store that away and think about yourself. And have you ever spent time where you observe someone, and again, are you not learning anything new? So once you stop learning something new, you've done enough observation. And that kind of leads us into, you know, where do we observe? How long do we deserve? How long do we observe, and how many observations we need to make? Now, there are a couple of different ways that observations can occur. You can just observe, where you don't become part of the setting, which can be distracting and can make the person nervous if you're not doing anything. So if you, for instance, go to, let's say, the school, and you're in the classroom, then the person may not do um, the same thing that they would do if you were participating. We work with a lot of transition age youth. So if you're just standing there sitting at the back of the classroom, the class might do um, might be different than if you ask the teacher, you know, to give you a role, some kind of role that you could also participate while you're observing. So it's important to consider um, how the situation is set up so that the person is comfortable. It should be somewhere that the person participates and that you are doing something, as opposed to just going there. I remember one time, um, another example, I'm always giving examples, I guess, where the person likes going to church, and the employment specialist says, well, I'm going to go to church with the person. Well, that's great, but just sitting in the church and not doing anything, um, that might tell you a little bit, but is there a fellowship meeting afterward where you could see the person interacting, or you could meet people, so that again, you are doing something, the person is participating, they're not just sitting there. And again, are we looking at going to places that are typical places where people without disabilities go, not just settings where people with disabilities are? And one final word of caution is that we really need to be individualizing our observations. We should not set up that everyone goes to Olive Garden to roll silverware so we can observe them, if that does not reflect the person's vocational themes. So we are not doing observations where everybody at our facility-based program does the same observation, or everyone in our customized employment um, program or services agency does the same observations. So that's not the purpose of doing observations. And I've kind of already said this, what skills you need to kind of get an idea in advance, what skills you can observe, um, what's natural as far as the length of time, and again, how many observations are needed. I think one or two maximum per place that you go. And again, if you find that you're not learning any new information about the person, then maybe you've done enough observations. Um, so just some final thoughts for us today as we close out our discussion. Um, You know, if we find the same old jobs that we've always found people with disabilities, are we really using the information that we learned during discovery? Are we really using those interviews and observations to learn about the person and establish vocational themes? So our interviews and observations are conducted to identify vocational themes for the individual and where we want to go next, leading into customized job development. So I hope that you have uh, gotten one or two interesting points today listening to my presentation, and that it has made you think a little bit about doing interviews and observations. We have a website where some resources are, and in addition, you will find on this webcast page other resources. Remember the going back to the young man who played piano. You can listen to him playing piano. And oh, by the way, one of the jobs that he got was playing piano at an assisted living facility, and he got paid $50 an hour for coming to play piano at that facility in the evening. So just remember those preconceived ideas or assumptions that we want to set aside. So I'm closing today. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Unfortunately, I didn't get to talk with you directly, but feel free to email me if you have any questions. Have a good day.